Whether it's death metal, black metal, power metal, or doom, Swedish metal is bursting with melody. Now, melodic forms of all types of metal are found all over the globe, but no other geographical scene is so deeply defined by it than in Sweden's strongholds of Gothenburg and Stockholm. Now, before we get too far, let's just run through a quick list of a couple bands in each subgenre so you could really see the breadth of what we're talking about here. Death metal? You've got In Flames, Dark Tranquillity, At the Gates, Amon Amarth, Arch Enemy, Soilwork, Hypocrisy, Edge of Sanity, The Growling Era of Opeth, even Dismember, to name a few. On the black metal side, there's Dissection, Marduk, Naglfar, Necrophobic, Unanimated. Alright, onward to power metal. Hammerfall, Sabaton, Dream Evil, Nocturnal Rites, Falconer, Lost Horizon, Wolf. What else here? Doom! Count Raven, a bit of Candlemass, Let's Be Gracious, just lump all of Catatonia in there, Isole, Grand Magus. So now you know the shorter list is actually Swedish metal bands who aren't melodic. When you look around the world, yes, there are pockets with their own scene and recognizable style, but nothing is to scale of what's going on in Sweden. How did this happen? And why here? There had to be some sort of big bang moment in the country that set this whole thing in motion, right?
I mean, if you look at those bands that you mentioned, all of them born in the 70s, we're virtually the same age, most of those. In Flames and Dark Tranquillity. In 82 or 83, there was something called Heavy Metal Marathon that they aired on national television. If you talk to any Swedish metal guy of that age, they would have seen that show.
For me, it's not just an album that stands out. For me, it's a show. It was a show that was 1983 in Dortmund. It was broadcasted on Swedish television. It was Judas Priest, Ozzy Osbourne, Scorpions, Iron Maiden, Crocus, MSG, Quiet Riot, and Def Leppard.
So Maiden were really important, so was the Scorpions. And those bands were melodic. In those days we only had 2 channels on the TV. And this was in the middle of the night and you had to beg your parents to be able to stay up because you were only 9 or 10 years old then.
I was 10 and I begged my parents I could be awake because it was...
Stay up at night?
Yeah, it was late at night.
Wow.
And that turned me into a metalhead. Scorpions was one of the first bands that I really, really digged, amongst others.
I saw the same show, just later. I was 7, 8, so I was not allowed to stay up for that one.
Think about that. 1983. Iron Maiden just released Peace of Mind. Judas Priest released Screaming for Vengeance 1 year earlier. Ozzy had just dropped Bark at the Moon. Scorpions' Blackout was released in 82. Def Leppard were getting big on the back of Pyromania. Quiet Riot's Metal Health became the first #1 metal album in the US ever. The Michael Schenker Group, whose star enjoyed earlier stints in both UFO and Scorpions, issued Assault Attack in 82, and Crocus's Headhunter had just come out. We're talking some of the biggest metal bands and albums of all time, not to mention what they had all already accomplished, all being put on display in front of Sweden's most impressionable young minds. At this point, it's pretty easy to see the trajectory of what happened here. Little kids stay up late, watch big heavy metal show, have mind blown by some of the flashiest guitar players ever, and a few years later, they start to form bands of their own, bringing in a bit of their own national heritage as well.
And then on top of that, we have this in our system, I think, is Swedish folk music, which is very, very melodic. Something that we latched onto. In Flames did it.
In the coming years, a lot of extreme metal started to enter the picture. At that time, nobody's really forming bands looking to merely clone their favorite artists. Everyone wanted to add something new to the mix, create their own style.
And since we were listening a lot to German speed metal and thrash metal, and Iron Maiden and like new wave of British heavy metal, we incorporate that into our music, and that's what became the more melodic death metal.
Yeah, like hearing melodic death metal for the first time was kind of a shock for me. It was different, you know what I mean? It was so much more song-oriented and catchier on the surface level. And I think a lot of the early Swedish bands that we bit from found influence in stuff like Boston, like early, like super layered harmony kind of stuff.
I do feel like a lot of the Swedish death metal stuff is like really close to like rock music, or closer than the American stuff, and you can see that in a lot of the Swedish bands like going more in that direction, like in the 90s and stuff like that. But especially Edge of Sanity to me is like really rocking, and you get that melody there and progressive kind of aspect.
Combined with those classic influences were those more furious elements of thrash that were surfacing alongside feverish tape trading in the early extreme metal underground. There were specialty record stores too.
But we had a couple of shops in Sweden. One was a shop called Heavy Sound, and there was another shop, House of Kicks, that put out or distributed Peaceville, Earache, and then Active Records. They brought over some Brazilian Cogumelo record stuff like Sarcophago and Sepultura, Holocausto, Volcane, all that stuff. You know, you had to find those shops in order to find that type of music. And then you saw that, wow, this types of music did exist a couple of years earlier in countries that you didn't know had a metal scene at all.
I was more a fan of death metal, so I noticed that death metal was happening around the world. Because to me, when I started listening, it was just heavy metal. But then I wanted something heavier and heavier and heavier, and that led into the speed metal, the thrash metal. Then I heard Scream Bloody Gore by Death, and I was like, what is this? Just like, it was something unique and a voice from a different world. But and that just opened up a whole new genre, and I absorbed everything. And we had a really cool record store in Gothenburg called Dolores, and they imported a lot of these albums. And I was in school in Gothenburg, and I went there all the time just to pick up, you know, whatever was new that week. And the guy who owned the store was awesome, just showing us stuff. So being a fan of these bands, me and my friends back then, we wanted to be part of a scene. And a lot of things were happening in Stockholm as well, and death metal scene that was coming forward.
Bands were influenced by poorly recorded demos that helped intensify this ugly new sound that was cropping up. Suddenly, it seemed like there was hope, that there was more to this than just jamming in the basement with a few friends.
To have a record deal, that's not going to happen, you know. But then with say Napalm Death, the Scum album, when that hit, was like, okay, what's happening here? You had the blast beats and all that stuff. And then along comes some of the Swedish bands, but the scene was so small.
But it was really cool to see the bands like Entombed and Dismember and Tiamat and Unleashed and these bands, because Entombed got a record deal with Earache Records, Dismember went to Nuclear Blast, Tiamat went to Century Media, and At the Gates got a deal with Peaceville, and you saw that, oh, it's possible. Actually, our bands get recognition from outside of our little sphere, you know, like outside of Gothenburg, outside of Stockholm, and maybe we have a shot as well. So that was very cool and inspirational.
With all of these bands breaking out of their home country and attracting a worldwide audience, it wasn't long before the ripple effect was being felt elsewhere around the world, especially once Carnage's Michael Amott pursued his opportunity as the new guitar player in England's Carcass, alongside Bill Steer. The result was the end of the groundbreaking gore grind era of Carcass as the band dished out necroticism in 1991, which found the group drifting into a more controlled, rhythmic dynamic ripe with pristine melodies. 2 years later, he helped draw the dividing line among the group's fan base when the hyper-melodic Heartwork dropped, a landmark release in death metal's evolution.
I can appreciate it now, I guess now that I'm older or whatever, but when I got it on cassette, I was just a Carcass, I was f***ing obsessed, man. I was part of that scene of dudes, the late 90s, the Carcass cloning, you know, that everybody was trying to do. That's what Cattle, that was like our MO, was like to pick up the torch or whatever, which, you know, a lot of us had been kind of, I don't know, let down, I guess is the word, you know, but we were a little more immature and we knew what we wanted. We wanted the next heaviest, gnarliest thing, and you go from fucking Reek of Putrefaction to Symphonies of Sickness, which is the greatest extreme metal album of all time. Just nothing comes close. There's a lot of imitators. It was just disgusting. It was very frightening. Well, back to Heartwork, I got it on import, I think I remember it was a good couple months before it came out in the States. So I got it on this import cassette, and then I heard it and I was just like, oh shit, they did the Black Album thing, they did the Metallica thing, damn it. But unlike the Black Album, which my friends all sat and tried to convince themselves for a good week or two that it was a good album, unsuccessfully, Heartwork was just, the musicianship was just too amazing, you know. So at the time, it wasn't what I wanted to hear because I was a immature, hyper kid, or dude, but in hindsight, it's a phenomenal record.
Even without transplanting a Swedish-born musician into a highly influential band, the country's metal scene served as the nexus for another scene on the other side of the world: metalcore. Out of all the melodic death metal albums that wielded influence over metalcore's development in the late 90s and early 2000s, one record stands out the most.
At the Gates, Slaughter of the Soul, when that dropped, it was just the sheer energy of the whole record was the thing I noticed at first. It was like everything's just like,
yeah, that.
Jesus.
Yeah, and his voice too, because it was like Carcass and him were the only bands really that kind of had that high, sort of like crunchy sounding vocal, where death metal in general was very low and growly, which I liked, but when that record came out, it blew me away. And then like the lyrics, dude, 22 Years of Pain, I can feel it closing in. What is that, Dead But Dreaming? Like, the lyrics were so heavy and so good, and man, and then like the acoustic interlude stuff and the melody, yeah, so good. To this day, you put that record on, I will destroy things.
What are you gonna break?
Whatever, put it in front of me, I'll break it.
My heart?
Yes!
Oh.
Break your heart.
Oh.
Let's write a song about it.
Oh.
No, I think it changed music. I mean, and still, you can't hold a candle to that record. Bands have tried. No, you can't.
I can hold it to it.
You're such a dumbass.
Don't light it on fire, though.
It's a 5-star record, untouchable. It's still, I'm not cool enough. That's what it made me feel like.
You know what, Jesse? It still makes me feel that way. In case I ever forget that, though, I can count on all of you watching to remind me, I'm sure.